All right. Welcome back. Welcome to the Future of Xtext. My name is Stefan Oehme. I am an Xtext committer working for Itemis, the company funding Xtext development. And with me is my wonderful colleague,
Sebastian. I'm also Xtext committer since 7 years now. I'm doing consulting and basically everything around Xtext.
and you actually recently had your anniversary, 7 years.
Yay! 1st of November.
Very nice. So today we're going to talk about all the cool things that have been going on in Xtext since we last came here. And boy, it has been a busy year. So let's get started with the future that we have right now, and that is Xtext 2.8. Xtext 2.8 came out with EclipseCon North America, and it had some really cool additions. And the first one I want to talk about is the new formatting API. So as you might know, who has used the old Xtext formatting API before? Yeah, quite a lot of people. Nice. You know that this API only allowed you to access the grammatical structure of a file, but not the semantics, not the AST. And that meant you could only do pretty simple things like, OK, if there is an opening curly brace, do a new line and indent, and when you see a closing curly brace, outdent again and make a new line, or maybe do a space after every comma, basic stuff like that. But once you get a more complicated language, like extend, for instance, that really isn't enough. So we finally have a formatting API for all Xtext languages that gives you access to the AST and also to the pre-existing document. And that means you can do a lot of smart stuff. For instance, let's say you have a list literal in your language, and your user writes just 3 items. You can say, OK, that fits on one line. I'll just format it as a one-liner. And now your user uses 20 items. And it still fits on one line, but you say, no, wait a second. Reading 20 items in a line is probably not such a good idea. I'll make it new line separated. Another use case that we now support is you can respect what the user did before. So let's say we have a lambda expression. And you know when you do functional programming, it's usually quite short expressions. So you do something like a list.map.filter.reduce and so on. And quite often, it fits nicely in a line, and it reads nicely. So you want to keep that on one line. On the other hand, sometimes the user knows this reads much better as a multi-line literal. And well, with traditional formatting APIs, you have to decide one line or multi-line for all files. And that's a bit limiting for the user. With the new Xtext formatter, you can make that much more responsive. You can say, OK, the user made a new line on the first line, so I guess he wants it to be multi-line, so I'll format it as multi-line. And you can look at it and say, oh, the user didn't make a new line after the opening brace, so I guess he wants a one-liner, so I'll format it on one line. And another very advanced use case is when you have different strategies for formatting, where you tell our formatter just, OK, first try formatting it this way. If that doesn't fit in a line, then this is my second best option, so try formatting it that way. And the formatting API will figure out all the details for you. So it will just try formatting the document, and if it doesn't work out, it will try your other strategy, and you don't have to do anything else about it. So with this API in place, we can now do some really advanced formatters, for instance, tabular layouts, which I want to show you in this highly interactive demo that we prepared. So as you can see here, we have a tabular DSL, and Sebastian is writing some code in his usual messy manner. But since we now have a cool new formatter, there's no problem because we can clean it up with just one click or one keystroke. So these kinds of formattings are now pretty straightforward to implement. But that is, of course, only one addition. And it is the first addition regarding white spaces, because formatters are about white spaces. But there's actually more about white spaces.
Awesome transition.
Come on.
Come on. They don't know yet what I will talk about. But there's more about white spaces because they are white space sensitive languages. Didn't work.
So yeah, they all had food.
There was this perception that or we often get this feedback from people on the internet, like on Twitter, so very serious feedback, that Xtext can only be used for toy languages or only for simple cases, and well, it would never be possible to do white space sensitive languages with Xtext, like Python is, for example. In fact, that was already possible since version 1.0, but you needed to tweak a few things, like essentially almost everything, but it was possible. With 2.8, it became significantly easier to implement a Python IDE, for example, with Xtext, because we introduced the concept of synthetic tokens. As you can maybe see with the pointer, well, when you write a terminal rule that fulfills this pattern of synthetic, colon, and rule name, so something that we figure is rather rare in real-world terminal rules, then the parser generator will identify this pattern and bind some customizations for your language. In other words, as soon as you use a pair of begin and or indent and dedent token or open or close token, you can use that in your grammar, and the actual semantics of counting the indentation level and decreasing it again will be bound in your juice configuration. So with just these essentially 4 lines in the parser rule and 2 lines in the terminal rules, it's possible to implement, for example, an X-based dialect that doesn't use curly braces anymore, but indentation to denote nesting of expressions. So this if expression here has a block with 2 entries in the expression list in the then part and 1 entry in the else part, and everything's really working as you would know or you would expect from a white space sensitive language. So I claim that has never been easier before to build such languages. Another thing that we added to the Xtext tooling for Xtext itself is configurable severities for certain validations. Well, that was already available for your DSLs since a few releases, but now it is even possible to configure the warning or error level for the Xtext grammars itself. So if you have like a project setup that the Xtext tooling doesn't really understand because of some interaction with Maven or PDE or other quirks, then you can now make the warning to ignore severity, or even, well, yeah, you can just ignore those without having these yellow markers in your grammar all over the place. Another thing that we added, which is very convenient and was a long-standing issue, is that we now get content proposals for your super grammar. So far you had to basically copy or remember the qualified name of the grammar that you wanted to use. It's now available with Content Assist. Speaking about preferences and improved tooling, we also did something for Xbase itself. With Xbase, we generate Java code. Well, there's not this holy grail of one source kind of format for Java. There are situations where you want to still generate Java 6 code because you want to run on Android, or you want to make sure that you use the topmost and newest features of the JRE, so you want to generate code that has Java 8 Lambda expressions in it. It's now easily possible to configure the language level of the source code that you produce with Xbase. The defaults are taken from your JRE settings, so usually you don't have to do anything for that, but if you want to tweak it, it's now easily possible in the preference page. Another thing that may be handy is the support for the add-generated annotation from JavaX annotations. So if you use quality metrics in your code, it may be cumbersome because generated code tends to not fulfill all these metrics. But these tools usually understand that annotation, so you can now easily insert that into all the generated artifacts, being it from Xbase or from the Xtext grammar generation process. While we were implementing all the new features for 2.8 and 2.9, we figured that the huge amount of source code in Xtext itself, which is written in Java, is not as convenient to edit as it would be with Extend from time to time. So we migrated much of the code manually to Extend from Java and figured that this should be automated and more convenient. So we added a new action to the context menu that I want to demo. It's now possible to take arbitrary Java source code and easily, well, if I figure that this is not the final stage of the code and I would need to do some major enhancements here, maybe I want to use a more convenient language. And what I do for that purpose is I right-click in the package explorer, and I can convert a class to extend, or even an entire package to extend. So it will ask me whether I want to keep the original source, or I'm trusting this tool, so maybe not. So yes, please delete the Java source code. And what I get is idiomatic extend code that really uses all the features that we would expect here. So the runnable is converted to a lambda expression, and string concatenation is replaced by a template expression. So it's much more readable and way more enjoyable to enhance this code now from here. And if I'm curious or brave or whatever, I could also look at the Java code that is produced from extend or from any other X-based language. So there's this generic navigation action open generated file available since 2.8. So I can go there and see, well, this project is configured with Java 8, so instead of the runnable, it's a Java 8 lambda, and we use the string concatenation here, and so on and so forth. So I can go to the generated code and take a look what really happened there, which is really handy when I write my own compiler for X-based languages.
All right.
All right.
So that were the numerous features for 2.8. But of course, we didn't stop there, and the future is approaching rapidly. So in just about 2 weeks, we will have the 2.9 release. And there is a lot of exciting stuff going on. So as you might have heard, we are now no longer just targeting Eclipse, but also, for instance, web editors. So your business experts can edit their rules, their financial processing rules, for instance, in the browser and still get all the benefits of Xtext. And of course, to do that, we needed a new wizard. We needed a code generator that supports generating code for a web project, for instance. And also, we figured it is about time that Xtext is easier to build for you. So we are ending the endless searching for Maven Tycho guides or Gradle guides and finally supporting you out of the box. So what we did is we created a new project wizard. And we now have better continuous integration. Wait for laughs. Thank you.
They're just polite.
Very polite of you. And also, we completely replaced the Xtext code generator, so what you know from the MWE file in your language, with an implementation based on extend, and which is also now completely customizable using Google Juice. So whatever you don't like about the code generator can now be easily plugged. And I'm going to show you how this new wizard looks like and what you can do with it right now. So I have here beta 6, by the way, which is already out since last week, so you can download it from the Milestones update site if you want. And I'm going to create a new project, new Xtext project. And as you can see, the first page looks quite familiar. You just enter your language name and file extension. But there is now a second page where you can opt in and opt out of all the different features that we support, like Eclipse plugin or web integration, or do you want projects for your tests? You should. And I'm going to select web integration, and the wizard will tell me kindly, yeah, compiling this web project will not work without a build system, so please, would you like to use a Gradle build? Yes, of course. We all love Gradle. We also support Maven, of course. And there's also the choice of a source layout, so either the plain source layout that you all know from Eclipse, with just a source folder and separated test projects, but we now also support the Maven or Gradle layout, where you have source main Java, source test Java, and the test code lives with the production code in one project. Although that only works if you don't want a PDE build, an OSGI bundle, because PDE only works with the plain layout. So we'll stay with that for now. And I hit finish. And of course, as always, I'm taken to my grammar file, which I will just leave as it is. Hello world is complicated enough. And now I'm going to open the new generator workflow. And as you can see, it is much like what I entered in the wizard. So we got rid of configuring all those paths and all those different manual steps. Instead, you just have your language name here, which is directly taken out of the wizard. You define a root path at the top of the file, which is nice because you can change it from external build scripts like Maven or Gradle. And then we have, okay, we wanted an Eclipse plugin. We wanted a web project. And here you can do other customizations, for instance, if you don't like our source layout. And you can also, of course, subclass this if you want and use your own implementation. And then down here, there used to be this super long list of different fragments that you can use for your generator. And it was kind of scary for new users because they didn't really know what all these things did. And also, if they wanted to edit something, they didn't know where to find it. So what we did is we just made it more statically typed. So now you get auto-completion here and can say, oh, OK, I want to change how the formatter works, and then just edit it here. And I'm not a Mac user, as you can see. So can tell, OK, I don't want the format to stop. I'll implement it myself. So just say false, for instance. It has gotten much easier, much more concise. Now, as you have also seen, these projects have this cool little green icon. That's the build ship nature. So we installed Eclipse Build, the Gradle integration, into this Eclipse. And so on the other side, I now have a nice tasks view where I can run all the tasks. So this build is really fully featured. It comes with runners for the different platforms that you selected. It even goes so far that you just need to enter your repository URL and need to provide your username and password, of course, if you want to deploy. But there's nothing else you have to do to get your language into your repository manager. It's ready to use. So I'm going to launch the Jetty server from here. And as you can see, you now have a nice headless build for your Xtext language. It runs the generator, it runs the extend compiler, it starts Jetty. And the cool thing is that this will work on any developer's machine and on your build server exactly the same, because all the configuration is checked in. So you finally no longer need to go Googling for how to build Xtext languages. It works the same for Tycho builds, by the way. And now we'll open the browser. And that's not the browser. Yes, it is.
It was the browser.
It is a browser. I just don't know a browser when I see it. And here we have our example editor. So now I get auto-completion in here. I can say, hello, EclipseCon. I get auto-completion. I get syntax highlighting. I get validation telling me, you forgot something, by the way. So I'll just fix this. Of course, this is a very simple example, but this was just to show you how easy it is to get started with Xtext and the new platforms now. If you attended Holger's and Jan's talk yesterday, you have already seen some much more elaborate examples. So our web integration comes with a lot of features like syntax highlighting, auto-completion, hover, mock occurrences, validation, and so on. And the cool thing about it is it just reuses all the services you already have. You implemented a validator for your language, it will work on the web. You implemented highlighting, you just need to port it from the Eclipse API to the new platform-independent API, which is basically the same, just a different superclass, and it will work in the web. And since there are so many cool features and so many different integrations that we built, we come with a big set of example projects in 2.9. So whatever front-end technology you want to use, be it Orion, Ace, or CodeMirror, whether you want to have a stateless server or a stateful server, and so on, you can look at the examples and get an idea how you can integrate it into your own setup. So if you're using Vardin or Eclipse J, it should be just as straightforward. All right. So that is, of course, already a lot of stuff. Supporting all these new platforms. But we didn't stop there, actually. We found more things that we could take from Eclipse and make it more reusable. So in Eclipse, you have this really cool incremental build that sees, oh, we changed this file, and these other resources depended on that file, so I'll just create the transitive hull and re-parse, relink, recompile these files. And we extracted that logic and made it available in the runtime plugin now. So there is now an incremental Xtext builder that can be used, for instance, in Gradle. So there will soon be a new Xtext Gradle plugin with incremental compilation. For all those of you who don't like IDEs for some reason, we actually have people on the forum telling us, I like to use Sublime Text for extend editing. Okay. These guys now can use the command line. And of course, it also makes your build server faster. And as if that weren't enough, we built all these new things around the core of Xtext, but we didn't stop at the core either.
Yep, exactly. We figured that it was about time to make the Xtext grammar language even more expressive and more powerful. There were still a few gotchas when it comes to language inheritance. So it was possible to override existing or inherited rules, but it was not easily possible to reuse the body of those rules that you implemented. And there was usually a few cases where copy and paste was involved when it comes to defining a grammar. And I claim that this is no longer the case. We basically introduced the mechanisms that allow you to avoid copy and paste programming in the grammar itself. So it all begins with the newly introduced supercall. So whenever you override a rule or inherit something from a base language, like Xbase, or even only the common terminals may be an example for that, it's now possible to still call the rules that you otherwise override in your own grammar. Let me give you a short demo on that. So let's kill the web server and look at the grammar declaration. So far, we inherit from the common terminals. What I want to do is, for the sake of the demo, is I want to mix in Xbase. So I can use content assist. Hey, yay, awesome! And then it's now easily possible to override an existing rule to introduce new concepts. One common use case when inheriting from Xbase is to introduce new literals, for example, a date literal or a time literal in your language, or to just suppress other kinds of literals. So maybe you don't want to have string literals or whatever. So to do that, I can use content assist here, and it will propose all the rules that could be overridden. And what I want to do is I want to override xliteral as a parser rule. And content assist will happily insert all the necessary imports. So I got a reference to the Xbase E package, and the return clause is, of course, correct. And earlier, we had a to-do comment here, but now it's possible to just call super and add new alternatives. Let's say I want a date literal or whatever. But it doesn't stop here. This super notation is basically just the shortest possible way to call a super rule. There's, of course, also the possibility to use a qualified rule name. So let's say I want to directly call x number literal and avoid all the other inherited stuff from the xliteral rule. So I can do this as well. So it's very convenient and really avoids copy and paste programming here. Another thing, and I'm pretty sure it is the oldest open ticket that we have in our, or it was the oldest open ticket that we have in our bug tracker, was about parser rule fragments. What we see here is a rule that has name equals ID and an exclamation mark. Maybe I have another rule that also uses this notation. Let's say we have something like bye-bye. And it really screams like extract me somehow, which was just not possible so long. And with 2.9, we introduced the concept of parser rule fragments. Fragments allow you to extract common parts of your syntax just to make your grammar more readable, for example. So I will extract a fragment called named. And I can just do it like this. And it won't have an impact on the structure of the AST that is produced, but it really avoids the copy and paste that we had here so far. So when the parser now consumes the greeting rule, I can't see the laser pointer, sorry. When it consumes this rule, it will read the keyword hello. And usually you would expect from earlier versions of Xtext, or if that would not be a fragment parser rule, that a new instance is created when you enter the production for named. But that is not the case with fragments. So basically you get one instance of greeting with a feature called name, and the parser will happily assign the parse ID there. So that is the second enhancement that we did to the grammar language. Which is parser rule fragments. And then there's another thing which is a little bit more involving. We call that concept parameterized parser rules. When you have a certain deep hierarchy of rules in your language, like expression rules, due to the left factoring, you have something like additive expression and multiplicative expression, and a lot of layers, many layers until you reach something like primary expression or atom or something. And then you have parenthesized, and it will again dive into the X expression or expression entry rule. So you have a very deep call chain of rules, and some clients of that rule may have a certain constraint, like in our context, there are no closures allowed, or something like that. If you wanted to express that in your grammar, it was also copy and paste programming that you had to do. With parameterized parser rules, that's no longer necessary. And in fact, we borrowed that concept from the JavaScript specification. Yes, it is possible to borrow things from there without being ashamed. So they had this nice little notation here where a statement list was parameterized with a Boolean flag called return. And if return was set to true from the caller side, so to say, this alternative is added to the body of the statement list. So basically, the parser generator expands this notation to two rules. One is statement list underscore return, and the other is plain statement list. We shamelessly adapted that solution, and it's possible to use almost the very same notation in Xtext now. So if you have such a situation where you have a very complex call chain but want to avoid certain passes under certain conditions, you can now use parameterized rule calls. So you can literally copy the JavaScript specification into Xtext, replace all the squared brackets by angular brackets, and you're like already in a very good shape. So it's became tremendously easier to build very complex languages with Xtext 2.9.
Yeah.
Last thing.
So you now have a good overview of all the features that are upcoming, and already seems like way too much to learn. But if you ask our bigger clients, then what do you usually hear when we ask, what do you want for 2.9, or any release for that matter? The answer is always performance, performance, and also I would like performance, and a little performance. So we did that. You all know this problem, or you knew, that when you type and you save, the builder starts. And then you type and you hit save, and there is a pop-up dialog saying, you shall not save, I'm building. And of course, you're not interested in that build anymore. You just change that file again. It doesn't make any sense. So we spent a good month or two fighting against the Eclipse Builder API. Well, Jan did. And he succeeded. So now, when you do this edit and you save again, we cancel the whole old build, reschedule the deltas, and do a new build immediately. So you're no longer blocked by your own save operation, which is cool for people like me who have a very happy Control-S finger. The next thing is the outline view. Back in the day, 2.7, when you opened an Xtext file, you couldn't just edit it. Holy, no. You need to wait until the outline is there. It's very important. Now we thought maybe editing could be more important than the outline. So we added an option, because it's not backwards compatible, but we added a new interface that we would encourage everybody to have a look at, which allows you to compute the outline in a background thread. So that means the user opens a file, he can start editing right away, and in the background, the outline will be computed and pop up a few dozen milliseconds later, depending on the size of the file. Now, there's also a big class of languages that are pretty expensive to link, for instance, or which have a lot of derived state attached to them, like X-based languages. They have this whole Java model attached to the main AST. And reloading such files from the original text is a pretty slow process. You need to parse them again, you need to link them again, type computation, and so on. So what we did is we created a storable resource API, which is just one juice binding away for you. And if you enable it, what we do is we take that whole resource state, the AST, any derived state, the node model, etc., and serialize it in a binary format to disk. So next time you open an editor that refers to that resource, we no longer load it from the text. We load it from the binary file, and it's there almost immediately, which gave us tremendous performance improvements for Extend. So if you have a similarly expensive language, you should really give that a try. And I already told you about the incremental CLI compiler, which we integrated into Gradle, but we didn't stop there. I have been tiptoeing around this topic for the whole talk, but yeah, we now support IntelliJ IDEA, which is actually cool, even at EclipseCon, because now you can tell all those colleagues who will not use Xtext because no IntelliJ support that you no longer have an excuse. This Eclipse project is so cool, you will use it in IntelliJ too. So you can now port your languages to all the important platforms, and there will be no more excuse for anyone to reject it, which is great. All right, and with that, we have completely overwhelmed you with new features, and hope you still have some room in your heads for questions. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Question is about multiple grammar mix-ins, whether we plan to support that or do already